Ola Ojewumi, thank you so much for being here on Head on Fire. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, it's such an honor to get to speak with you. So for folks who don't know you or your platform or your previous work, tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Ola Ojewumi. You can follow me at Ola's, OLA underscore truth on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But I am a disability rights activist. I became disabled when I was about 9, 10 years old. I had a heart and kidney transplant, and that inspired me to begin to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities, specifically on the intersections of race, gender, and disability. And I have a nonprofit called Project Ascend, and we provide college scholarships and grants to disabled youth and to youth service programs across the globe.
And I understand how it can feel like I don't want to toot my own horn here, but you have worked with some pretty amazing organizations. MoveOn.org, Planned Parenthood, Healthcare Voter. You have worked alongside the House Majority Leader Nancy Pelosi, Senator Cory Booker, House Majority Whip Steny Hoyer, Senator Menendez, you have been on PBS, Democracy Now. There's something, Lady Gaga, MTV, Glamour Magazine. I mean, your credits, ma'am, your credits.
Thank you. I'm just bashful. I think I have imposter syndrome, but yes, I've done a lot of political activism, and I was on boards for charities run by General Colin Powell and Lady Gaga, and I spend a lot of my time in the DC metro area advocating for healthcare access and healthcare equality for people with disabilities. It's really my passion to get people to see the value in a disabled life and to also see that our stories matter and that disability does not mean that you no longer can contribute to society and that you are suddenly, a person non-worthy of human rights.
I I want to come back to something that you just said, but I want to up top here. I want to dive in to the way that I came across you and your platform and your work, which was honestly, given everything that you've done, shocking and kind of sad that this was the first time that I came across your work and your writing and your advocacy, but it had to do with recent social media dust-ups regarding Beyonce and Lizzo. So I don't know if you ever thought I am going to be mentioned in the same sentence as Beyonce, Lizzo, and Ola, but these two singers share more than just a few things in common, one of which is this summer, over the period of recent weeks, they've been called out by members of the disabled community for using a word that many felt was an ableist slur. However, over the days and weeks that followed that initial call out, a discussion arose around the seeming lack of voices of color being represented in this discussion. To the casual Twitter user, the charge appeared to have been led against Beyonce and Lizzo by a small number of white disability advocates, with people of color, specifically Black voices, having to fight for space in that discussion. Um, let's start there. Uh, how how did that discussion impact you? You have done a lot of work in the last few weeks to really try to make space for Black voices in that discussion. How did that whole thing evolve, and where does it stand now?
Well, it opened up a very big conversation about privilege and disability and recognizing people for their full identities. There's this belief that if you're disabled, somehow you cannot have white privilege. And this controversy with Beyonce and Lizzo kind of brought attention to the fact that white disabled people, particularly wealthy white disabled people, are leading the conversations about disability in public discourse. And that needs to be stopped. It's a function of racism. And when it comes to Beyonce and Lizzo, I am a huge fan of Beyonce, so much so that I made a hiring guide, a disability hiring guide using Beyonce's lyrics for Glamour magazine in about 2016. I also dressed up as the disabled Beyonce for Halloween. So I had my like unitard. I had this big hat, this formation hat. She inspires me in so many ways. So when the criticism came out, I was taken aback, and I was like, I don't think a lot of people understand what Beyonce represents for disabled Black women, particularly because she does things to include us. She in her fashion campaigns, she's one of the first artists to include disabled Black women like Jillian Mercado and Erin Phillip, particularly a trans Black woman in a wheelchair. She's been inclusive her entire career, and I did not want to be a part of any community or any movement to tear down a prominent Black woman in the name of disability justice. I felt like you can find valid criticisms in popular music, but if this is only being directed at Black women like Lizzo and Beyonce, that's a problem. And one of the unique things with the backlash towards Lizzo is fat phobia in the disabled community. We don't talk, there's not enough nuanced discussion about eating disorders and sizeism in the disabled community. And a lot of I do believe a lot of the backlash has come from Lizzo being a very proud fat Black woman. And I will say disabled people are very much persecuted for their size. And I mean, I'm a wheelchair user. I became a wheelchair user in my 20s. And amongst a lot of my, Black disabled sisters who I've met as a result of being a wheelchair user, we openly talked about the things we would do to maintain weight so we wouldn't look like, how do I say this? So we wouldn't be treated more harshly, because people believe that if you're fat and in a wheelchair, it's because you did something to deserve it. You're out of control. You eat too much Burger King, and that's compounded by your Blackness. And so I think a lot of people, a lot of white disabled people, Lizzo is hard to take. Someone who is fat, proud, and a pop star, and there's a lot of self-hate involved in the backlash against her.
Something else that I've noticed in that discourse that reflects discourse that happens in other marginalized communities as well, in which the specific slur that was used, I won't say it obviously, but the specific slur that was used has different meanings inside of different communities. And one of the reasons why so many Black voices, at least again as a casual observer, outsider, reading this discourse and hearing the interviews and hearing the subsequent, conversations come about, is that the word that was used means something very different inside of the Black community than it does maybe in the disabled community, or even specifically in certain subsects of the disabled community, much in the same way that there's a slur for gay men here in the US that's a cigarette over in London. And in the way that if I'm walking the streets of London and somebody asks for a cigarette and I'm suddenly like, whoa, sorry, what did you just call me? What did you just say? So, um, can we talk for a second about, because you mentioned up top, the privilege and the intersectionality of trying to parse out um, language, usage of language, when something is and isn't problematic language, and who gets to sort of be the gatekeepers of something being problematic language.
In terms of the discussion about, the S slur, and what it means to in the African American community, I don't believe that people take, African American vernacular English seriously as a language which has its own grammatical rules
Mhm.
and its own deeply rooted history. And I will say this, amongst Black disabled people, amongst the Black disabled community, there are a lot of us who are torn on this subject. because culture is not an excuse for ableism.
Mm.
And there are words that disabled people have reclaimed, like cripple. Um, it's very commonly used colloquially, and we have things called crip lit. We call each other crips. Similar to how people have reclaimed queer, and how even with when it comes to the N word, I don't like to compare slurs to the N word, but groups are allowed to reclaim slurs. I do believe that there needs to be a cultural context because within this discussion, Black disabled people, ableism has been doubled down in the Black community because of these discussions. Um, we're experiencing ableism from not just the larger society, but the Black community when it comes to stating that this is a word that's used in the culture. I do not believe culture is an excuse for ableism, and I do think it's a valid criticism and something that we need to discuss as a community. And that I do think that the Black community needs to address it, and sometimes other voices are not needed. And so, respectfully, I, as a non Jewish person, I do not have a right to talk about what slurs the Jewish community can and can't use. Um, I am, as a American citizen, I'm not allowed to discuss slurs immigrants can use. I'm not allowed to. I need to know where my voice belongs. And if you're not a part of that community, it's wise to allow that community to discuss their cultural context without interruption.
Um, I very often have people come on to talk about culture and community and sociology on the show, and so this isn't a new term for longtime members of the audience. But if this happens to be somebody's first episode, and this might be perchance somebody's first time coming into contact with these terms and ideas, in your own words, what is intersectionality? What does it mean, and how should it be applied to hot topic discourse, like what we were talking about above?
I think, well, I will always fall back on Kimberly Crenshaw's definition of intersectionality is that it is your unique experience given your identity. What people have, how people have misused that term in creating, oh, I'm oppressed in this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. I'm more oppressed than you because I have X amount of identities. No, intersectionality applies to any identity and the experiences you have because of them. So, say that you are white and a male, the intersectional experience of being white and a male affords you certain privileges. Intersectionality isn't merely about oppression, it's about examining privilege and oppression based on identity. And so when it comes to these discussions about ableist slurs, and you are often people of color with disabilities are often forced to choose their race or their disability. And so we're stuck in the middle. Um, and I will say this as a member of the disabled community, there I will say that as a Black person with a disability, we are often asked to put our disability ahead of our race. And that does not work for me because your race predicates how you experience disability in this country. Um, for example, if you look at the few organizations that advocate for disability rights in public policy, they are led by non-disabled white men, and that's for a reason. uh, when they do have people in leadership positions, or people with disabilities in leadership positions, they're often white people, and I've seen overqualified disabled people of color pushed out of leadership positions, told their voices don't matter. And that is the intersectional experience of being a person of color and disabled, because you will experience racism not only from the non-disabled community but within your own.
Another term that has come up in recent months that I really like is calling in versus calling out. Uh, a lot of people, whenever Lizzo was the first of these two artists to have the to have the lyric discussion sort of explode onto the scene. Yeah, it was Lizzo. And what I enjoyed was that people said Lizzo has been a long time advocate and ally. We need to call her in, not call her out. Um, what does it mean to call in versus call out? Are there times when one should do one or the other? Um, eh, and which do you prefer to do?
I think calling in is important, especially if you examine someone's history and their commitment to social justice. I do think we have a call out culture. I have actively participated in the call out culture. Um, but I think we have to examine the reasons we're calling people out. If it's misdirected anger, or if it's rooted in, like biases we have against certain communities. I think calling in can lead to positive discussions. For example, I have a colleague who I talked to about the Lizzo controversy, and his response was, Lizzo, has a very positive message, um, and the fact that the song got cleared, and she probably has a lot of diverse people on her team. She prioritizes diversity. That there probably wasn't a disabled person in the room, or disabled person on her team to kind of guide this, guide the way the music was interpreted, or before it came out. And so I think calling in can lead to discussions about how do we make it so these mistakes don't happen, how do we make it so we can diversify, say, the music industry, so they understand how to no longer use ableist slurs, instead of just calling out and demonizing people who've already experienced demonization because of who they are. The people who I do feel like deserve to be called out are those who are very much resistant to change. Those who aren't like Lizzo or Beyonce, who aren't willing to change their lyrics. Um, I don't think any white artist would be forced in the same way, or vilified in the same way if they were called out. Like, for example, Big Time Rush. Big Time Rush was a popular boy band. They sold 5.8 million records in their entire career, and they've sold more records than Lizzo. And their PR team actually,
I'm sorry, what? What?
yes, I know, yeah.
What?
hmm They had a show on Nickelodeon. They had, I mean,
I'm reevaluating everything I thought I knew about everything right now. What? They
yeah.
they how?
I mean, you know how it goes with boy bands. I don't know who your favorite boy band was, but mine was NSYNC and B2K.
Girl, we could talk about NSYNC all day. I was NSYNC over Backstreet Boys all day long.
Yeah, Justin was the love of my life at one point.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's so problematic now.
I know. Especially after Prince. Woof.
Oh, oh, justice for Janet. I'm sorry. I need to get back on track. I do apologize. This boy band from Nickelodeon has outsold Lizzo to this day from years ago. That just blows my mind. I can't fathom. Please continue about Big Time Rush.
Okay, so there was this controversy with Big Time Rush recently, and I got dragged by TMZ regarding this. Yeah.
I've never been dragged by TMZ. What's it like to be dragged by TMZ?
It's comical. I found it hilarious. I couldn't help but laugh, and because the article looked like it was written by someone who, well, who would work for TMZ.
Did you frame that? Did you? I mean, like, I don't know. I feel like if TMZ is dragging me for that, that might be. Yeah, I might frame that or something. Put it in a scrapbook somewhere.
I'm keeping it for posterity. I have all the screenshots. I'm gonna frame it as an accomplishment. But yeah, I'll give you an example. Like this controversy actually happened like like the week after Beyonce changed the lyrics. Big Time Rush, their Twitter, their Twitter PR team put out a message about going viral using the hashtag Paralyze, because Big Time Rush has a song called Paralyze that was never officially released 10 years ago, but they wanted a demand. They're like, okay, if you guys make this go viral, we're gonna go ahead and release this song on Spotify and all music channels. So the hashtag Paralyze goes viral, and there's complete silence from the white disabled community. And I said, do you guys see that Beyonce and Lizzo were vilified and called out in such heinous ways for something a white boy band is doing? And I was completely dragged. People were angry. Like, I did not know Big Time Rush had such an international following. I was getting cursed out in different languages, uh, fan pages, and the same people who, I mean, I'll just be honest, there are a lot of clout chasers out here who are building a brand, who are building brands as disability rights advocates by, piggybacking off the fame of prominent black women. None of these people responded to the backlash. The person who called Beyonce out actually said, "It's not my responsibility to call everybody out now." And in that
No,
same,
but you just so happen to be the person behind actively going after two of the most famous black women in the world, but you don't
yeah,
have anything to say about these white boys.
yeah, I mean, in that same day, she mentioned Megan Thee Stallion about a lyric in her song. But the irony was people were using the same excuse. Well, the song was made 10 years ago. I'm like, well, last week they asked Beyonce to change the lyrics to Partition, and that song came out 9 years ago. You all are holding Black women artists to a higher standard. And when it comes to Lizzo, I'm using Lizzo as an example because she sold less than Big Time Rush. Like, these are, you might not see them at the same level, but there is a call out culture in condemning people of color and women at levels you wouldn't do to white men and white women. And the charge against Beyonce was led by disabled white women, and that is a problem.
Just I'm I'm just still processing that there is a boy band from Nickelodeon called Big Time Rush and it's sold Lizzo. The language that we use has a powerful effect on the way that we perceive the world. When we normalize speaking about certain groups in certain ways, we come to think of those people as having certain qualities. Disability advocates speak of feeling infantilized, for example. How can we identify ableist language? And how do you recommend people work to create equity, not just in correcting speech, but in transforming community? And I'd also like to add this piece that you just kind of brought up of is there is there a time limit on going back and reevaluating songs from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, movies from 40 years ago? I mean, is there a time limit on going back and dredging up media to then retroactively cancel the people involved from decades ago, or is it because I ask because as a gay man, I there's a lot of media that I feel like was made for me, or if I had been an adult at the time, would have been sort of aimed at me. I think of like the movie The Birdcage. When I watch the movie The Birdcage, it makes me angrier every time I watch it. It's not funny. It's not a funny movie to me. It's incredibly sad. It's wildly homophobic. Just it's very painful to watch The Birdcage, and because it's just, oh gosh, it's just so many things, so many layers to that movie. um but I also have to realize what it did for its time, the conversations that it helped to create, how it was seen as a very positive thing at the time. And I have to understand that me in 2022 evaluating that media, I have to evaluate it in context, that I can't I'm not dredging it up in order to cancel Nathan Lane. I'm dredging it up maybe in order to comment on how far we've come. So I turn that to you. How do we identify ableist language? How do we correct it to create equity? And when we are evaluating media, pop songs by Beyonce that just came out this year, films that somehow get, you know, pulled up years, decades later, how do we have those conversations?
Well, I don't think there is a time limit, and I don't like to associate, acknowledging an ism like ableism, racism, sexism, or heterosexism. I don't like labeling it as canceling, but acknowledging that people use problematic languages,
Mm-hmm.
in my is not akin to canceling folks. For example, John Lennon and Yoko Ono and their song "Woman is the Nigger of the World." They apologize for that, but people still regularly like use the song, even though it's like completely racist. Um, and there's this meme online about white innocence, and one of the things about white innocence in the meme is that either they're too young to know better, still learning, or it was a different time.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is a problem. I think time is used as an excuse to exonerate people from valid forms of criticism. I don't care if it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it's still language that shouldn't have been used, whether people knew better or not. Um, I, how do I say this? Like, I, I don't want to excuse behavior using time because that has constantly been an excuse for white supremacy. Like,
Sure.
there were white people during the American Revolution, the Civil War, that knew slavery, and slavery was immoral, more and morally wrong. And this idea that everyone was just caught in a trance and just couldn't help themselves is the biggest lie ever told. um and for example, one of thinking of in sync. I remember when JC Chazé went solo, and his album was called Schizophrenic. I guess that was okay back then. I don't know if it would be okay now. But I would never name my album Epilepsy. Um, I I feel like if you just practice that, what if I placed a different type of disability term in there? Would it be okay then
Mm-hmm.
or now? No.
Speaking of language, you have written passionately about the effect that it has on you as a Black citizen, as a woman, as a Black woman, the child of African immigrants, a disabled woman, to see folks like our former president, whose name shall not be said, speak about each of those groups with a callous disregard for their equity and humanity. You even said something at the top of the show in which your advocacy seeks to show the value in a disabled life. Um, we have a midterm election coming up. How would you challenge anyone seeking our votes, the votes of the people in this audience? What are red flags that you look for in candidates, and what keywords are you looking for in future proposed legislation?
Okay. Actually, I will say this: there are so many complexities within people with disabilities in the voting period. Like there was a strong number of disabled people that voted for the president whose name shall not be said. uh, it was at least over 40+%. And that kind of comes into it when it comes to intersectionality. What I would like to see with this midterm election coming up, I made a comment on Twitter about politicians in general using disabled people in their ads, but never actually hiring them afterwards. There is an exploitative nature in which disability is brought up in public policy, and even when it comes to racial justice. And what I would like to see is a cabinet member with a actual visible disability instead of promises to make the lives of people with disabilities easier with empty promises that never come to fruition. When it comes to even using ableist language in describing in the way candidates speak, and to be honest, in general, to learn more about ableist language as people, like there is actually an online resource authored by Lydia Brown. She has an entire listing on autistic Hoya. You can Google autistic Hoya and Lydia Brown and see a listing of disabled slurs and terminology, and you can become educated on how we shouldn't use certain terms in their historical context. And I feel like politicians and society, one and the same, should learn from the mistakes of our previous president, um, because he openly mocks a disabled reporter, but also um, there's a larger contempt with politicians when it comes right now to reproductive justice and using the disabled body as a justification for pregnant people to have rights to access to abortion and birth control. I'm extremely pro choice. I've worked with Planned Parenthood for years, spoken about them and their greatness publicly. I was a political commentator at one point, and I was on MSNBC AM Joy Reid, and I use these when I'm on television. I use that time to talk about reproductive justice as a political issue for people with disabilities because we can become pregnant too. We need to stop making this a non-disabled person issue. And unfortunately, both sides of the political spectrum have failed people with disabilities. It is legal in this country to pay people with disabilities below minimum wage. You can look on the US Department of Labor's website, and the people you see working in grocery stores who are disabled or working in janitorial positions, they can literally be paid $1, and the government allows this. And we have been pleading as a community with both sides to outlaw sub minimum wage. And I apologize for not going in order, but I want to go back to reproductive justice and how painful it is to see these rallies and not see a disabled face there, but hear rhetoric that you know we should have rights to abortion access and birth control because what if the child is disabled? That is eugenics. Um, I feel like a woman or a pregnant person or anyone should be able to have a right to an abortion for any reason, but to claim that abortion should exist so people like me shouldn't exist is immoral, and both parties have failed us.
A question that I like to ask folks in very specific communities is, what is a question that you never get asked, that you always kind of go into interviews, especially higher profile interviews, and think, uh, I hope I finally get to talk about this. What's that question?
uh, I don't want to be inappropriate,
Oh,
but
go ahead. Oh, go ahead. Oh, I'm gonna get my pen. Hold on.
I would say, what is it like to experience, or what does your love life look like?
Well,
Um,
girl, what does your love life look like?
I mean, I would love to talk like in my bio. I like put disability lifestyle expert because I talk about policy a lot, but I talk about just lifestyle in general. And part of that lifestyle is navigating life as a disabled woman, and and I want disabled people to be seen as sexual beings, like,
Hmm.
and the part that loops in with public policy, sexual education, all that good stuff. But I would love to have an interview about what it's like to be young in a wheelchair and have to navigate online dating. And I'll give you an example. I became a wheelchair user when I was 20 years old, and I will tell you right now, I would rarely get hit on until I was in that chair. Yes, I get hit on more. Yes, very much so.
Don't
Um,
know how to feel about that. Like,
I want us to have public conversations about sexuality and disability and how many trans disabled people I know. But like, for let me go back. I will say this. I am a wheelchair user who can still walk. Part-time wheelchair users exist. No, like no one on this earth
Hmm.
is wheelchair bound. You are not fused to your wheelchair even if you can't walk. But when I'm walking, I do not get hit on nearly as much as when I'm in the chair. And I will say this: it is because of I don't know. There's a lot of predatory people out there. And I was educated by some of my disabled women friends early on that they told me, men will see you as more vulnerable, that it's a rape complex, that they feel like you can't escape, or they can prey on you because of your disability. Um, and also how you're perceived on in dating. Like you know I'm on dating apps. I get a lot of, not I'm not bragging, but like I still get, but I don't often put myself in my wheel. I place pictures of me in my wheelchair, and the politics of hiding your disability on dates and
Mm.
figuring out which dates you can go on, and you know navigating sex as a person with a disability, that people think disabled people don't have sex, and the fact of the matter is they do. If you've seen the documentary Crip Camp, there's this one disability, like she's a big time historical figure, and she talks about getting a surgery because she had an STD and the doctors couldn't believe that she had it. They thought it was symptoms of something else. Yeah. And she's like, they couldn't believe that I was sleeping with the paratransit driver who drives who drives disabled people, specifically in a bus for people with disabilities. But yeah, I've had relationships end in tragedy because of my disabilities, and then I've had men who've embraced it. I had a guy who used to massage my surgical scars, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing ever, and he loved my scars, um and he was gorgeous. Oh my god. And when you roll into a club literally and like you're that bitch in that chair, you automatically get a lot of attention. I'm sorry. It and it's like being a disabled person, you are constantly stared at. And like I have to make sure I don't have boogers in my nose because I don't know what people are looking at, and you have to get used to that. But I've also been told that the way that I dress and the way that I carry myself, that's part of the staring. That I sit up straight, that I make sure my hair is done, I put on makeup, and I'm like, this is more political than you think because I'm gonna
Mm.
be treated a certain way if I appear like I'm an attractive person with a disability as opposed to, like someone who, is not. And it's terrible. Like the politics of beauty standards with disability and how much effort we take to not look like we're homeless. And that's classist in it of itself. Like I like walk around with a Coach purse, but on the side of the street, I'm rolling down the side of the street, and this car of teenage boys stopped to try and give me money. Um, so those are the questions I would love to be asked. Like, what is the lifestyle like for a disabled Black woman?
Well, what is the lifestyle like for a disabled Black woman? I mean, what would you like those conversations to evolve into? I mean, how how could we possibly make a more equitable world? How do we make, where do we get there? How do we what's next? Where do we want to go? How do we do that? How do we make sure that our events are truly accessible to everyone? How do we make sure that our conversations, our apps, our dating, our culture is free of stigma? It is oh, I hate to I hate to do that because I feel like that's putting so much on you to be able to answer like, oh, great wise one, tell tell us all how to fix us. But I mean, you there have to be parts of culture, parts of life that you're just like, if I could wave a wand, all of this would be gone. All of this would get added. Like, so you have a wand. Here we go. You have a wand. Where are you waving it?
Oh my God, I'm waving it everywhere from from like employment to friendships to inspiration porn. Um, how do I say this? Uh, there are entirely far too many resources online. Like we all have a mini computer in our hand that has access to all of the information you need in the world, and that information about how to become more accessible is, a simple Google search away.
Mhm.
And so when you're planning these rallies and these movements, make sure that they include disabled voices, because there are too many disabled people on social media saying, I'm here, I can speak about these issues. The only problem is I can't get to you. Why aren't you making these rallies virtual? Why are we meeting in mass numbers during a pandemic in which can kill me? Um, why aren't movements for reproductive justice focused on, healthcare for or like for disabled, I'm not healthcare, but rights for disabled parents? In 30 plus states you can have your kids taken away from you based on your disability alone. People don't interact enough with disabled people to know that there are generations of deaf families that have been raising deaf babies. So for you to take a deaf child or a deaf person, a baby from a deaf mother just on the basis of being deaf is incredibly discriminatory. um, I would like people to go out of their way to befriend disabled people online, whatever you need, whatever, and encourage people to tap. Not just don't ask what's it like to be disabled. Like I wouldn't want someone to go, "What's it like to be black?" Um, sorry, I'm contradicting myself, but like those conversations about disability will occur naturally as you get to know someone. Learning etiquette, like not asking a person what their disability is or how they became disabled, because to be frank, it's none of your business. Disability, for example, like it can be traumatizing for someone to have to relive the how they became disabled. I don't want to have to explain my medical history to you. Like, would you? It's. I mean, just mind your business. Also,
It sounds like I'm so sorry to interject, but it just sounds like so many of like the basic things, the basic building blocks of understanding of learning about just other people, other types of people that aren't like you. Is the answer is stop acting like the answers aren't already readily available. Like my own question just now, how do we fix things? Well, there's a lot of folks out there. You could go Google that. We do have a lot of leaders that are like, well, I just asking really basic questions up on a stage somewhere. Celebrities. Oh, I put some resources down here. Let us know how we can help. Well, if you had Googled that, there's probably 74 organizations you could go support right now and all sorts of infographics and research that's already done and prepackaged for you. And I think that so often we have these this tunnel vision of only seeing it if it's served to us, only seeing it if somebody comes and tugs at our arm and say, oh, hey, did you want to know about what it's like to be a tokenized gay man and be the sexless side character in every rom-com in the 90s? Would you like to know what that is? Because here, let me tell you. Because if have do you not know? Because let me tell you. And I feel like it's that. Is it that? Stop acting like this information isn't already out there.
yeah, yeah, you're right. I agree with you 100%.
I something that you said earlier, in that you want people to be in cabinet positions. You want, people to be placed in prominent decision-making roles, et cetera, et cetera. I think, the caution there is immediately people run around to find the most visible representative from that one community and then make them the embodiment of all people for that community. Like Pete Buttigieg right now is the gay man. He's the gay politician. Tammy Duckworth, the wheelchair using politician. That's it. That's the one. So put her in the cabinet, put him in the that kind of thing. I feel like we take these people and make them tokens, and we put Cory Booker, the black man politician, etc. And people get reduced down to the one stereotype that is digestible to over culture. Um, it, how do we what do we do to make sure, or what would you recommend for people who might be in hiring positions, who might be able to build out a team? How do we just make sure that we're not being tokenized? How do we make sure that we're not just choosing the same person every time? How do we, cast a wider net?
Oh, this is a good question. I'm a person who can hide my disability and who can be visibly disabled. So for job interviews, I literally used to park my wheelchair somewhere like in the bathroom or in the stairwell because I didn't want to be judged based on my disability. And so I want to validate that people with hidden disabilities are still disabled.
Mm,
But I think it goes beyond the layer of just the identity of disability alone. I think when it comes to hiring positions that you should want to get to know a person on a deeper level than just their resume. Was this person, you can't ask certain questions legally, I understand, but it doesn't take it doesn't take a lot of effort to understand if a person came from a middle class background, or if a person has been elevated because of their parents' last name, or if a person has marred experiences due to intersectionality. For example, I take President Obama's administration. I got the opportunity to intern in the Obama White House in 2011, and he had advisors who specifically in the Office of Public Engagement where I worked in, and they were directors of public engagement, associate directors, and they were specifically advising him on disability. At least two of them were Black disabled women, and one was a disabled white woman, and another was a disabled Black man. And some of their disabilities were hidden, some of them were visible. But what I noticed was they all had different life experiences. And I was inspired just because I was this disabled person. I was always alone. I felt like I was in an island of me, that no one else like me existed. I had never met another Black disabled person up until getting to the White House. And when I saw this beautiful woman named Claudia Gordon, who worked at the White House, she's the first Black deaf attorney in the U.S. and she is a baddie. Oh my God, she was a model too. She had a like a big, like, I don't know which company, but maybe Tommy Hilfiger, but an ad in Times Square, and she was everything to me. And she was an immigrant from Jamaica. She tells this one story at the White House about, her neighbor as a child being deaf, and everyone just referring to her as Dummy, and she
mm.
thought, that woman's name was Dummy. Um, Let me not tell too much of Claudia's story. She can tell it herself. But understanding, disability from an immigrant's perspective and looking deeper at someone's life experiences so they're not tokenized as just the most visible person, but they can bring the experiences of other identities into their jobs and do it effectively.
I want to know very much, especially given a few of the things that you said earlier. What? So we are starting to open up. The world is starting to open up a little bit more. Things are a little bit more accessible, a little bit safer to get back out there. Are you getting back out there? And by out there, I mean, are we dating? Are we on the apps? Are we going to bars? Are we meeting people for dates and drinks and whatnot? And if so, how is that going? Because I'm now very intrigued.
Okay, so I am on the apps.
Okay,
I
okay,
am I am dating. I am not I'm not necessarily going to be out there in terms of I'm doing FaceTime a lot. Just
okay.
getting to know people. I'm just the reality is I'm immune compromised, and folks. believe, when you have a transplant, I've had like a heart and kidney transplant. They think that, it's just you're fine now, but you're on medication for the rest of your life that suppresses your immune system. So leaving my house is still going to be dangerous, but I will say that dating while disabled is traumatic. I will not sugarcoat it. And I have boatloads of privilege with when it comes to dating. And to be honest, it really does hurt. You have to gauge when to reveal your disability and when to not, because men. I mean, let me just say gender.
Men.
Yes,
Men. Men. You don't have to say anything else. Men. I feel like
I
the
mean,
audience gets it.
yes, men. Can I've had men completely vanish when I tell them, sometimes I need to use a wheelchair, like, and then I've had a guy tell me, can I get one too? And I have very high standards. I very high standards. Um, and I'm not saying that this is rare amongst disabled women, but it's so easy to get caught up in exploitative relationships because there's not a lot done to build the self-esteem of disabled women. I mean, have you ever seen a movie with a disabled woman lead, where someone was romantically interested in her, not in spite of her disability, but just because she's a beautiful person on the inside and out? We have never been a love interest in anything. So how can you feel like anyone can love you? And that constant rejection, it's painful. So it's made dating very hard for me. Even though, I don't want to make the disabled life look miserable. I've had some great experiences. And I don't, how do I say this? I want to make it very clear, that being disabled does not mean you're entitled to a miserable life or entitled to be alone forever. I know a lot of disabled women in relationships and marriages and who have kids. And also, there have been other times where, being disabled is kind of fun. And it's got it. I'll say this, for example, I'm big into music and I go to a lot of concerts, not during the pandemic, but, at a concert, Common like serenaded me, the rapper, and I wrote an article about it for Vibe.
Oh
But he told me,
my.
yeah, he was telling me how it's beautiful and all this nice stuff, and I stood out in the concert because I was the only one sitting down in a standing room only concert. I there was this one funny incident, where I got to go backstage and meet Fetty Wap. And a rapper. He was popular a couple years ago, but I hit on him. It was funny. And his crew filmed it, and I told him, don't let the wheelchair fool you. Disabled girls, we're baddies too. So, I mean, my wheelchair has made me have some pretty funny experiences with men because, I'm very forward in telling them how I feel, and I don't think a lot of women are like that, you know. And I use my disability as a punchline sometimes.
You mentioned earlier uh, that disabled people aren't usually the romantic lead, and I feel like there's probably a few people screaming at their speakers right now, Marley Matlin. But what about Marley Matlin? And I feel like that just kind of goes to the earlier issue of one person being the entire embodiment of a community forever. So just because Marley Matlin was in one movie one time was a romantic lead one time 20, 30 years ago, that doesn't mean that we've now solved it.
Oh my god! And I've only ever seen her in Law and Order, and maybe on Family Guy. What movie is this where she's the love interest?
Oh, it's old. Hold on, I don't even remember it. Marley Matlin, we are doing this is great podcasting, by the way. This is excellent podcasting. People should do more live Googling um on on yeah. Let's see. She did. God, this was old. This is real old. Let's see. She was on West Wing for a million years. It's a million years ago. I don't even remember.
Oh, it's a
Uh, Children of a Lesser God, I think. Her breakout role that I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the one she won the Oscar for. It's called Children of a Lesser God. It's a romance. She's the lead, and I'm pretty sure that's what she won the Oscar for. But it was like 1986.
Oh,
So
I wasn't born yet.
yeah, yeah. But see, that's the thing. Like, just because she was a romantic lead that one time, 36 years ago, don't ask me how I know exactly how old that is.
It's
Maybe I was,
okay. It's okay.
maybe that's the year I was born. But
Can I ask you a question?
yes, you may.
I have a few friends that are disabled sex workers. Have you heard
Hmm.
of Andrew Gurza?
The name sounds familiar. I did a ton of research because I was trying to get kind of a roundtable together of sex workers this year or early this year, I think, and it never panned out. So maybe that name came up during that research.
He's a wonderful man. So he's a wheelchair
Well,
user.
send him my info. I would love to interview him.
Yeah, I think, and there are a lot of disabled sex workers trying to change the narrative and show people, disabled people do have sex. So
That's amazing. Um, I would love for people to be able to connect with you, Ola. So if folks want to connect with you online or support your nonprofits, where can they do that?
you can visit www.project-ascend.org to view my nonprofit Project Ascend, and you can donate to our great work. And you can always follow me on Twitter or Instagram. I have a website and my name is hard to spell, so it's www.ola.ojewumi.com, or you can just follow me at OLAS_truth on social media platforms everywhere.
Well, Ola Ojewumi, thank you so much for the privilege of being in conversation with you today. It was phenomenal. I hope people are inspired by this conversation.
Thank you so much. And I can't reiterate this enough. You are gorgeous.
Oh gosh, I got it this time. It's recorded. Thank you.
I don't think people listening understand how beautiful you really are.
Oh, thank you. My mom's gonna hear this. Thank you so much.
You've got